There's also a different type of effort, which is effort to learn and effort to improve. And that involves different activities, different attention. In a state of flow, usually you are performing, but performing at a high level of challenge, but it's not too challenging. But it's also true that at the other end of the spectrum, if we're constantly learning, then our performance also suffers. Well, it's funny. I didn't used to read at all until I was in my 20s. And the reason was that growing up, I only experienced really boring books. I think we live in a learner's paradise and in a non-learner's pit, right? So there's so many amazing tools and resources and content for us to learn and explore.
Hi, I'm Greg Voisen, the host of Inside Personal Growth, and it gives me a great pleasure to introduce to you one of our sponsors today, Thais Gibson from the Personal Development School. Now, your personal attachment style is one of the most powerful forces in your life. It shapes your relationship, your self-worth, and your beliefs. What if you had the power to become securely attached? You'd be able to build stronger connections and heal any relationship. Attachment expert Thais Gibson from the Personal Development School has pioneered a transformative, practical approach that will change your relationships forever. The first step, discovering your own attachment style. The free attachment style quiz at the Personal Development School, you can take it in less than 5 minutes and you'll get a personalized report with insights about your patterns, your beliefs, and the next steps to make real change. Don't miss out. Check the show notes below for the link and start your journey today. Well, welcome back to another episode of Inside Personal Growth. And joining us today from San Jose, California, is Eduardo Briceño. And this is the book, The Performance Paradox, Turning the Power of Mindset into Action. Eduardo, thanks for being on today, and I really appreciate having you. How are you doing?
Doing great. Thanks for having me, Greg.
Well, it's always good to have somebody like yourself who has an expertise in an area where I think so many people today are kind of like struggling because there is so much, I think, pressure being put on folks, especially in the corporate world, for performance. And I think it causes, as people say, performance anxiety as well. So I am going to let the listeners know a bit about you first, and then we'll get into the series of questions. Eduardo is a global keynote speaker and facilitator who guides many of the world's leading companies in developing cultures of continuous improvement, innovation, and high performance. I watched his TED Talk just this morning, How to Get Better at the Things That You Care About. And he's got another TED Talk, so there's two up there, The Power of Belief, have been viewed more than 10 million times. Pretty phenomenal. Congratulations to you, Eduardo, on that. He's won multiple awards. He's been featured in Harvard Business Review, Big Think, Business Insider, Entrepreneur, Fast Company, Forbes, Inc., and so on. Early in his career, he was the co-founder and the CEO of Mindset Works, with the Pioneer and Growth Mindset Development Services, and he started that at Stanford with Carol Dweck, which most of my listeners know, and he held that position for a decade. Prior to that, he was a venture capital investment with the Sprout Group, and he served on several for-profit and not-for-profit boards. And before that, he was an investment banking analyst with Credit Suisse. And the list goes on and on and on. He's got his MBA, his MA from Stanford University. So he is definitely somebody who is knowledgeable about this. And it's just a pleasure having you on. And let's just kind of kick it off and I think the main thing I hear today inside cultures of companies, and I think it really depends on the culture. But in a lot of cultures of companies, Eduardo, there's this need for the management because they've got to meet milestones and goals and all kinds of things. Um, and it's like people are working harder, faster, And it doesn't seem like there's an end in sight. Technology has sped things up. A lot of things have helped to precipitate this, what I call environment. And it puts these, I would say, unrealistic expectations on a lot of people. You speak about the big idea that you present in the first chapter, and your reference, you call it chronic performance. Can you speak about that and, what you see going on and potentially what you see as a way to resolve some of these issues?
Sure. Well, what you describe, to me, I think it can sometimes feel like a hamster wheel, right? Where we are working towards something and the world is changing faster and faster, and there's greater and greater complexity and challenges. And the solution that we come up with is just to run faster, right? To make the hamster wheel turn faster. And that is unsustainable, like you said, but it also just doesn't work because what happens is that what we tend to gravitate toward often is just to perform more. We want to perform, we want to deliver results, so let's just perform more so that we can keep up and we can continue delivering. And what we don't realize is that the reality is that there's two different forms of effort. There's effort to perform, which is important, effort to deliver, effort to get things done. But there's also a different type of effort, which is effort to learn, and effort to improve. And that involves different activities, different attention, than when we are focused just on doing what we already know how to do, try to do as best as we know how, try to minimize mistakes. That's what I call the performance zone. And that's what we're often kind of stuck in. So if we're always in the performance zone, I call that chronic performance. And that keeps us stagnant. That keeps us at the same level of effectiveness versus what we need to do is to combine that with a different form of effort, different strategies, different systems, which are designed to leap beyond the known, to experiment, to ask questions, to try different things. And it is the combination of those two things that allows to increase our performance over time. Performance is good in terms of achieving our goals, but in order to achieve higher performance, we need to not just perform, we also need to learn, and integrate these two things in our lives in sustainable ways so that we maximize our medium-term and long-term results.
Well, you being a speaker and an author and a coach, and coaches are usually about performance, right? It's like, okay, I come to a coach because I want to perform better. So the underlying theory is that I've always got to get better. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but you mentioned that performance paradox is a counterintuitive phenomena, and that chronic performance could be the reason that we're feeling this stagnation in some areas of our life. Um, what can people do to counteract the issue? You said to take a leapfrog forward, right? Okay, well, that means I have to step out of my comfort zone. That means I have to create a new mindset about the way I think about this. So I'd love to know what Eduardo would tell our listeners out there who have this performance paradox.
Yeah, so the performance paradox is the kind of counterintuitive reality that if we're constantly performing, our performance suffers. In order to improve our performance, we have to do something other than performing, which is different activity, which I call the learning zone. And so great coaches, yeah, you might go to a coach to increase your performance, but in order to do that, in order to increase your skills, you have to engage in different activities that is different from doing the activity. And so great coaches, like John Wooden, you hear what he teaches and what he says, and he's very clear that you need to do what you're saying. You need to get uncomfortable. During practice, you might if you're weaker on the left side, you might use the left side a lot, or you might go to the part of the court that is a weakness for you, or that is a strength for you, but you're getting get uncomfortable to get even better. And during the match, during the game, you're going to try to just win. And so you're going to go to what you think works best and try to minimize mistakes, try to increase your results at that match. So for us, yes, getting uncomfortable out of what we already know how to do is critical in order for us to increase our skills, like you're saying.
Yeah, I reflect back on what you're talking about, and Stephen Kotler's been a guest on this show so many times, And, he talks about his flow genome project and all the things, and flow in particular. And, for so many people, they would love to attain this euphoric state of flow, right? It's like everything is timeless. It's just kind of like I can sit here, and we all know we've had moments or segments like this where everything just kind of sinks together. Our performance is amazing, whether you're a runner or you're a basketball player or you're an employee inside of a company. What might you tell somebody from a standpoint of some of the things that they could do to actually get to that flow state, where they are enjoying, right? Because we look at employee engagement today, it's at like an all-time low all the time. Every time I see it, it's like 30%, maybe it's even less than that. But that's part of the issue, isn't it, Eduardo?
Yeah, well, flow is an interesting thing. So with flow, you I think so there was a debate between kind of the world expert on deliberate practice, which is Anders Ericsson, and the world expert on flow, Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, and they were kind of going back and forth on uh, can you be in a state of improvement, in a state of flow, and I think when you're engaging in something called deliberate practice, which is when you are um, outside your comfort zone, you're working on a very specific skill back and forth, trying new strategies, getting feedback between each iteration, and it involves a lot of effort, a lot of concentration. That can feel often not in a state of flow. It doesn't. It is not. It can feel flow, but it doesn't have to. In a state of flow, usually you are performing, but performing at a high level of challenge, but it's not too challenging. So it is right at the edge of what you can do well.
Right.
And so you're really achieving things really well, and you are, at your peak at that moment. And I think of it more as a state of performance rather than as a state of learning. But it is where you're exploiting your skills as best as you know how, and you get into that
Right.
timeless, fantastic place. And so there's a place for that, and it's a magical place. And for me, um, uh, I mean, one way that I think is required for flow is to be focused on one thing. So often in this today's world, we are so kind of distracted with
Right.
notifications, and you can't be in a state of flow if you are, getting dinged with messages and
Yeah.
other things. So you need to be kind of um, blocking your environment and focus on that one thing that you're going to be kind of deeply engaged in is one of the requirements for you to get into that state of flow. For me, that's the most important one. But also, connecting with something that you care about, that connects to your purpose, and that you feel like is something that is important for you to be engaging in.
And I think what you just said at the end, something you care about and that you have a love for and a compassion for, really makes the difference in getting in flow so much easier because all of the chemical releases in your body, the endorphins and the oxytocins and all the things that you get the reward from, they continue to come in, and that happens in that state of flow. Whether you're a skier or a mountain climber or all the other things that we were talking about earlier. Now, you and I have a common friend, Chip Connolly, and you've been through the Modern Elder Academy, which is facilitated by Chip and sometimes other people as well. But he was recently on the podcast, and he's been on the show several times before, and I love Chip, and I love what he's doing. And you did that inward journey. You took that time to go away and do that retreat. What did you learn, and what could you convey to the listeners? Because, he puts it out there as kind of a midlife thing. Well, you don't look like a guy that's in midlife, by any means. You look pretty young. But the point is that midlife is being pushed further and further and further out, right? Maybe they even call midlife for a person like me who's 70 years old. So the point is that what did you take away from it, and what how could it actually affect people positively like it did yourself?
Sure, yeah, I loved going to Modern Elder Academy, and Chip's become a dear mentor for me. And he would consider both of us midlife for sure. I'm 49 years old, and people who go to Modern Elder Academy are from their 20s to their 90s or
Right.
further. Um, and it's a wisdom school, or they talk about kind of being a wisdom school or a school for midlife, like you're saying. And one of the things that it made me reflect on is that in through adulthood, we are going often through different transitions, right? We might our body changes, we might move, we might shift jobs or industries, or we might get married or get divorces, or our parents might go through transitions that affect us, or our kids, their parenting, etc. And there's no support in society to help us learn about those transitions and the next chapters in our lives. So we have kind of schooling support for childhood and adolescence, but then we're sort of out in the wild, and then we're just supposed to know what to do or just to perform life and work. And so I love what they're doing in being deliberate about providing kind of support and a learning space and wisdom for people to navigate life and to continue to grow throughout lives and to continue to go into experiences that are different from what we've done before. And that makes life so much richer, right? Rather than just do the same thing over and over and stay in that hamster wheel throughout life, it's like, how do we get to different experiences? But we need to learn and expose ourselves to other to ideas and to wisdom in order to navigate those transitions and those new chapters. So there's tons of activities, a beautiful place. And one of the things that is beautiful about it is the sense of community. People who are together going through experiences of growth in adulthood and supporting each other in that way, and how important that is. We've talked about mindset and effort and flow, and those are all things that happen inside of us in our minds and as individuals, but all of that is affected so much by the people around us. And so the community that we form and what the community values and the habits that those communities form, those affect us so much, and affect our quality of life and our success so much.
Yeah, I think like any retreat, hopefully you feel safe and you feel vulnerable and open with the people around you because they've either experienced or are experiencing the same feelings and emotions you are. And that's what Chip has created with that Modern Elder Academy. I've been to many, many meditation retreats on the Orcas Islands, and I find that the people that come there literally are the same kind of folks, and we have a lot of things in common, and it's easy to open up and share. Now, you speak about what you refer to as the perform learn curve. Okay. Now you've spoken a little bit about it on the fringes, but can you explain this concept and how it can help the listeners overcome performance paradox? Because you said, okay, we got to go to this learning point. So we have to stretch a little bit. Like you were saying in the basketball courts, John Wooden, right? It's like, how are you going to look at your left side, your right side? And I think a lot of people uh, get comfortable and they don't want to be in discomfort. And there are elements of discomfort which are going to be required for you to stretch to grow, right? So explain how you make that simpler or easier in people's mindsets to say, "Hey, I can actually do this."
Sure. Yeah. So you asked about the perform learn curve. That's just a visual representation that shows that at one end of the spectrum, we've talked about if we're constantly performing, our performance suffers, it's lower. But it's also true that at the other end of the spectrum, if we're constantly learning, then our performance also suffers because we don't get things done. We don't contribute to other people. We don't actually achieve anything if we're only learning and purely learning, however enjoyable that might be to some of us. And so, for us to achieve, whether it's our personal goals or our professional goals or any other goals, our medium and long term goals, we have to have a balance and an integration between these two zones of performance and learning. And so, if you think about the kind of medium and long term results, it is kind of like an inverted U curve, right? Where, if you're purely performing, you're at a low level of goals and achievement. If you're purely learning, you're also low, and it's somewhere in the middle where you're maximizing your medium and long-term results. Now, if you're only looking at your short-term results or your immediate results, the way to maximize that is through the performance zone. And so if you have a big project due this week and you just have to get it done and that's the only thing you care about, it might make sense just to disregard learning for a bit and just focus on getting things done. And that's reasonable to do for the short term. But the issue is that if we are doing that every single week, then we just stay at our current level of performance. So the solution, like you're saying, is to integrate the learning zone into our lives. And like you're saying, that can feel uncomfortable in some ways. For some of us, learning certain things can feel comfortable and enjoyable and really great. But an example is, you know, my my wife and I want to both speak more Spanish to get better at Spanish, but that feels uncomfortable in our relationship because we're more comfortable speaking English to each other. And so it helps me to remind myself that it is supposed to feel uncomfortable speaking with my wife in the language that is not the language we usually communicate with. And that associating that discomfort with something that I want to achieve, which is getting better at Spanish, helps me engage in that experience. Or, I also have about a year ago started taking cold showers because it's kind of healthy, but it also is reframing it as a way to train myself for discomfort and to lean into discomfort. That has also helped me, get into the cold shower because I know it's good for me.
Well, the next thing you'll be doing is cold plunges.
Yes, haven't
You
gotten to it
haven't
yet.
If you haven't done that yet, my son does them every morning. He's got a cold plunge in his garage, and so I know it. I think he said it's at 34 degrees. So he said he can get about 3.5 minutes, 3 or 4 minutes. But it is definitely a wake up call, as they say. Um, but look, you mentioned this learning zone, which we've talked about, and it's about inquiry. It's about experimentation. It's about making reflecting on mistakes and implementing adjustments on the journey toward greater excellence, as you say in the book. What is the transformative power of moving between the two zones? Because you said, hey, at the one end is the learning zone, right? And that might be the stretch, but we really want to be somewhere kind of in between.
Yeah, we want to be both getting things done and contributing and achieving things and evolving and transforming throughout our lives. And we need both of those zones in order for us to do that. And so life at some points can feel like boring and stagnant and like we're just in a linear, you know, habits of just inertia, right? Of just doing every day the same thing. And so when we think about transformation or evolution, I think a more interesting life, a more fulfilling life is one where we are changing ourselves throughout our lives. And in order to do that, we have to engage in both zones.
Well, look, the body seeks much of the time homeostasis. And we're talking about the physical body, but I think also the mind, depending on your mindfulness and meditation practices. And you mentioned that the learning zone and the performance zones are states of mind. So speak with us about how we can shift the mindsets for a more balanced work and personal life, because it's one thing to stretch the body, push it to a new heart level rate, run a little bit faster, lift heavier weights, all of the kind of things that you can do to the body. It's another thing when it comes to the mind, because I think many people, if you ask them, I think this statistic still holds true. Um, they haven't read a book since high school. Um, and when you think about the number of books that Amazon has, and the number of people that I have on the show and the number of books that I've actually profiled, it's hard for me to believe that people don't do that. But everything is so fast, they don't feel like they have time. So you got to state to get these people to stretch the mindset.
Well, it's funny. I didn't used to read at all until I was in my 20s. And the reason was that growing up, I only experienced really boring books. Like when I went to school, what we read was textbooks that were just facts. You were just supposed to memorize things that were not relevant to me. They didn't seem interesting. And the only purpose of the textbook was to pass the test. And I didn't have any other books. Like I never, I didn't read any books that were interesting to me. And so I always associated reading and books with things that were really boring. Until I was in my 20s, I married my wife, Allison, who is an educator she's a professor of education in a university, and she teaches teachers how to use children's books in the classroom in schools. And she exposed me to amazing books, and now I read every night, and I love it so much, and both kind of fiction and nonfiction. And it's just like you're saying, there's just a world of awesomeness in books. And I listen to podcasts, and I get myself exposed to different things in different ways. But I can relate to people who don't read, especially because I think in school we teach that reading is boring, and I think that's changing. But yeah, a lot of us haven't discovered the magic of books. But when you say that the two zones are states of mind, yes, a lot of it is about what we're paying attention to. Like, for example, there's a research study that was done that was looking at people's brains in a brain scan machine as they were solving problems inside of the machine. And what they realized is that some people, they were paying attention. Their brain was very active when they were getting information about whether they got this problem right or wrong. They just wanted to know whether they were right or wrong, but they were not paying attention at a different time, which is at the time when other people were making uh, paying attention to the mistakes that they made. So when the machine was telling them what they did wrong, and they had opportunities to learn what they did wrong and to think about those things. And it is the people that paid attention to that learned something and were able to get better in the subsequent problems. So their performance increased over time, but only if their brain was active when they were getting information about what they did wrong, versus some people didn't want to think about that because it made them feel badly about themselves, right? To think about their mistakes. And so when I say that the learning zone is a state of mind, in the learning zone, we have to pay attention to the mistakes that we're making, to the hypothesis that we're making, to the experiments we want um, to 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 execute, and how we're going to learn whether that works better or not. We want to be asking questions. We want to be listening better and asking follow-up questions. That means we need to be really actively listening, and that's all about what's happening in our brain. And that's what I mean. People can be solving problems, but it is, what are they paying attention to? Are they paying attention to what they can learn, or are they only paying attention to what they can already do and what they have gotten done?
That's a really good way you put it, and I think that, that when people are curious, they usually wanna solve a problem. So they're gonna look at mistakes as a way to say, "Well, that's one way I tried it, but it didn't work. So let's try a different hypothesis here. Let's go down a different road. Let's try a different way of solving this problem." And as I see, so many entrepreneurs are problem solvers. That's what they are, and they're highly curious. So there's this deep level of curiosity. They're also um, ADD. So they're all over the place, right? They can be. And that's because they have interest in so many different things, right? But you might find it like, okay, I got an interest in this and I have an interest in that. And I think if you're interested in things and you're curious, um, you're probably the kind of person that's going to look at a problem and the one where you made a mistake, and you're going to find a way around it. You're going to find a way to actually make it work. So you mentioned,
Yeah, can I comment on that?
go
So,
ahead.
yes, absolutely, I agree with you. I think in particular, you described the successful entrepreneurs. I think in entrepreneurship, there can be some traps where we might not get to a state of curiosity. Like, for example, sometimes entrepreneurs get really enamored with the solution that they came up. They see a problem, they also see a solution, and then they want to like sell people on their solution, and it doesn't work. And so that's when entrepreneurs don't find what they call kind of product market fit, as opposed to, instead of falling in love with your solution, fall in love with the problem, right? And then do that curiosity and that kind of lean startup methodology where you are testing hypothesis and being customer centric and iterating on what the solution might be in order to solve the problem you're going after. And that curiosity approach that you describe is a much more likely way to lead to success.
Yeah, we just had a gentleman on from Switzerland talking about how to create innovation. Innovation is the name of the book. It's a Wiley book. And it was interesting as we were talking, Stefan Diefenbacher. The reality is that, you have to create a culture where people in your company are creating. You have to put a budget toward it. You have to have it be ongoing all the time. And, we see iterations of products go from the iPhone 16, but really are there revolutionary breakthroughs in innovation? And that's a big difference than seeing an iteration of a product like going from an iPhone 15 to an iPhone 16, right? There, there's maybe a few things that have been incorporated in it, but for breakthroughs to happen, you really have to set it out there, and you really have to invest into it.
Yeah.
So
And like you
look,
said, we have to create the communities because it's not individuals that are doing this. It is a community of people
yeah,
who are valuing that experimentation and innovation, and also the right systems, so that you're ha- uh, creating the right habits and structures in order to create that innovation.
yeah, most definitely. Now, you mentioned the failure to prepare ourselves for this ongoing change is what economists refer to as present bias. Um, Speak with us about present bias and how we can break free from it because look, it's rampant. It's everywhere. And I think this is one of those things that's always there, but people don't, it's almost like it's blind. They never see it because they're really not looking for it.
Yeah, I agree. Present bias is kind of a cognitive bias that as humans we all suffer from, to overvalue the present and undervalue the future. So it leads us to underinvest, right? To overspend, underinvest. And the learning is a form of investment, right? It's an effort that we make to increase our skills so that we can reap the benefits in the medium term and the long term. And so we have this psychological want for immediate rewards, which then gets future rewards kind of away from us. But in addition to this psychological bias, there are structural systems in our society that exacerbate that. Like, for example, you know, in public companies, research analysts tend to base the value of the stock on the current net income. And so CEOs of public companies feel a lot of pressure to to maximize the current net income. And that leads them to underinvest in things like research and development, which would lead to those innovations like the next, technology that can really make a huge difference for the company in the future. And so when CEOs feel this pressure, that cascades down the organization to just execute short-term goals at the detriment of long-term goals. And then that gets into the culture of what management is, what leadership is, what workplace is, even in private companies. And so how do we get around this? First, we need to become like aware of this cognitive bias and the system so that we can see them, and then create some micro habits, I think, to help us think more about the longer term, right? And so, for example, one thing that I do every morning is I remind myself of what are my goals? Like, what am I trying to, what is my life mission, and what is my strategy? What are my goals? And that helps me, start with the end in mind, and then figure out what do I need to do today to go toward those long-term goals.
Well, that brings me to this concept. You and I talked a little bit about it. I told you that I did interviews with 22 mountain climbers that climbed all the highest 7 summits. And in this chapter, you call it the big idea. Speak about learning by doing, and if you would, kind of weave in some of the stories that you told in this chapter, um, and also speak about your learning while doing cycle. You've got this learning while doing cycle, and you had some great stories in this chapter.
Sure, and you've met Alex Honnold and worked in a book, that involved him, and so I started the chapter with a story about him. He's a climber. He has climbed lots of vertical rocks without any ropes, just with his body, including El Capitan in Yosemite, which is just a huge vertical, granite wall. Yeah, and his strategies more better than I do, but when you're doing something like that, you really need to build your skills to such an expert level before you get into that performance zone of going up the wall without a rope. Because if you make a mistake, one mistake can cost you your life, right? So you need to use ropes in the learning zone and to really um, try different strategies as you're going through tricky parts of a mountain. And like you were telling me before, that he has a journal and he writes down, the positions of the fingers, and he reflects on what he's doing and what's working well, what he might try differently next time. And that requires a lot of learning zone time. So he went up El Capitan like 40 times with a rope before going up without a rope, as an example. But most of us, so that approach can work if you're a violinist or if you are an acrobat, a gymnast. You need to be kind of on the learning zone with a net underneath or like foam blocks, taking risks and falling and that's great because you have something that you are an expert on that's very specific. But most of us, our jobs are very complex. They involve lots of different skills. The world is changing in many different ways, um, and and so for us, most of us don't have a ton of time to just devote hours to a learning zone every day. And so I think the biggest opportunity for improvement for most of us is not to block long blocks of time to devote to the learning zone only, but it is to shift the way we work, the way we get things done, so that we're getting things done at the same time that we're also improving. And that's what I call learning while doing. There's this term learning by doing that is, well, you know, known, but I think it's a little bit confusing because it implies that if you just do, then you will learn, right? Learning by doing. But in fact, learning by doing comes from theorists on experiential learning. And if you read what they wrote, they say that you don't learn, like John Dewey, for example, he said, you don't learn from experience, you learn from reflecting on experience. So you have to do something other than just do in order to learn. And they came up with cycles that looked kind of similar, but it looks usually they look like something like you try something or you have an experience, and then after experience you reflect on your observations to try to figure out what happened there, right? And maybe what worked well, what didn't go well, and then you develop a hypothesis of how the world works or how this skill works, and then you test something that okay, I'm going to try this differently next time. And so you try that different thing and you have that experience, and then again you go through that cycle, you reflect on how that went, and then you develop a hypothesis of how the world works. And that's a cycle that involves different activities than just doing the activity over and over again. And so if we just go and do every day in the same way, and we don't stop and reflect and figure out what to change and do differently, then we get stuck in that hamster wheel, and then we feel like we need to just run faster and faster and faster, and we don't make progress because we're doing the same thing.
Yeah, very well put. And I'll segue here to something that I think almost anybody listening to this podcast can understand. If look, YouTube has really been such revolution for people that want to do things. And if you want to learn how to do something, you go find a video about it. You probably type in almost anything and you'll find a video, and then you can see somebody doing something, repairing something, fixing something, whatever. And I think it's become like, I'm just gonna use this for so many people to go to as a default to watch someone do something and go, "I didn't know how to do that. Let me try. I can do that and feel a lot more confident. If that person can do it, I can go ahead and try this." And they succeed. And I love the fact that we have taken it that way. And I find that AI is doing the same thing. It's revolutionary, but we're finding new ways of doing it. I was watching the 60-minute special about how it's being used in the classroom with the kids. The Khan Academy now has got this new piece of software with AI in it, so the kids can't go get their papers done through AI. It actually asks them questions to prompt them, right? So I find this is it's just fascinating where we're going with all this technology. And I'd like for you to speak about the 6 essential learning zones briefly, because we don't have that much time left, and the cornerstones of change, as you call it, because I think these are the most important things. It's a way for somebody to put a label on it, and I'm gonna tell all the listeners, go out to Amazon and get a copy of this book. There's a lot of illustrations in this book, there's a lot of questions, there's a lot of things to prompt you, but this is really a great book if you're finding yourself in this performance paradox, it'll put your mind at ease because he's giving you strategies that you can walk away from after reading this book and then highlighting it and rereading it again, hopefully, or listening to it on an audiobook. Any way you have to get this book, you can get it. And the point is that it will help put your mind at ease about how you can progress to the next level without high levels of anxiety and stress and all the other kind of things. So, what are those 6 learning zones, strategies, and what's the cornerstone for change?
Sure. Well, first, thanks, Greg. And I think when you talk about kind of YouTube and AI and kind of Academy, yes, there's. I think we live in a learner's paradise and in a non-learner's pit, right? So there's so many amazing tools and resources and content for us to learn and explore if we have the mental models and the relationship with learning where we're not about perfection, we're about progress and about exploration and discovery. There's just a world of joy out there for us. But there's a ton of different learning zone strategies. We've spoken about some of them, right? We've spoken about deliberate practice. We've spoken about the importance of reflection. We've spoken about analyzing mistakes, not just making mistakes. We don't learn from mistakes. We learn from reflecting on mistakes. Another one is experimentation. And sometimes we think about experimentation as too i- uh, overly performance oriented. So we think we're going to try something, but we're going to just try it as a way to scale, as opposed to try it as a way to learn first in a small scale to figure out what works, and then once we figure out what works, then we scale that and we make it more performance oriented. So that's something that I explore in that chapter. I also spoke about I write about the importance of um, developing our mental models in our brain rather than thinking about kind of the internet or AI as the substitute for our brain, right? It's because we can find so much information in online searches or in AI, we might get the impression that now we don't need to know things. But actually, when we know things, we can integrate those things in our brain and come up with innovative ideas. And so we need to both use those tools, but also use them to make ourselves smarter. And it's in that partnership that we can become a lot better. The final maybe strategy that I'll mention is feedback. Because we're social animals and we are collaborating with each other and want to have an impact in our colleagues and our customers, it's so valuable to solicit feedback frequently and broadly. We learn so much about what we're doing that's helpful to other people, what we're doing that we could be doing better, other people's perceptions, other people's ideas, and that's perhaps um, the most powerful learning zone strategy in work and life is to solicit feedback.
The feedback loop. It's so important because once we get the feedback, the thing is, I have the feedback now. So what am I going to do differently once I have the feedback to try and do it better, or improve on it? And I think that's the loop. And I think if people really are open to feedback and they use that loop, they're really going to propel forward. So in wrapping this interview up, what are 3 key ideas you want our listeners to take away from the book and how can they really just apply them to their life, their work life, their personal life, to really make things less stressful, stay more in this learning zone, and be more, how do you want to say, have a level of discomfort, but also comfort.
Sure. So say first, to overcome the performance paradox, we need to integrate the learning zone and the performance zone, right? So involve both of these types of efforts. Um, Second, we want to develop a sense of purpose, something that we care about, something that's important to us, so that we can direct these two different forms of effort into something that matters to us, right? Otherwise, why are we going to work either in the learning zone or the performance zone? And third, we want to think about community, the people around us, whether you talked about kind of building a culture in entrepreneurship or in the workplace, right? But we can do that in our personal lives or in our work lives. The people around us matter a lot. And so we can be deliberate about what we value, you know, talking about those things that we value, talking about the things that we care about, that we're pursuing, and the behaviors of how we interact with each other so that we are helping one another build those mental models, strategies, systems, and habits that help us continue to learn and grow as well as achieve in work and life. And so for you, in terms of, you asked about, well, how do we do this in a way that's kind of discomfort, but also comfort?
Yeah.
Through doing this, through small habits, right? When, for example, the simple habit of reminding ourselves every morning of what we're working to improve, that simple habit, it activates the learning zone. It reminds us that we want to go beyond the known and do things not for perfection, but for progress. And little by little, it changes our mental models. It changes the way that we think about mistakes and about challenge and about trying new things, about feedback, about all these things, so that we do become more comfortable and eventually like these things and want these things as life goes on.
So, yeah, and I believe that mindfulness in the morning, a bit of gratitude, reminding yourself of your purpose, which you said you do, these are small little steps. Being grateful for everything that you've got is another small little step. The other thing is just how you treat your body, exercise, the routine. And I think people that have routines, when you get out of a routine, you have a tendency to not feel as good about yourself. You have a tendency to be more depressed. So I can't say it anymore that if you're going to stay in this learning zone, that do the things that you would naturally do and then push one additional step further in that learning arena in the learning zone. And I want to let everybody know that if they want to learn more about your book, your offerings, your speaking, your workshops, everything, go to briceno.com, briceno.com. And there you will learn more about this. There's a press room there. You can contact Eduardo as well. I really want to thank you for being on. You've really given our listeners a lot to think about, a lot to actually say, okay, if I picked up this book, how could this change myself and the way I learn and the way that I actually kind of push my comfort zone, push me out of my comfort zone to do something differently. And you've done a great way of putting it to people so that they understand it easily. So thanks for being on Inside Personal Growth and sharing your insight and your wisdom today.
Thank you, Greg, for having me, and thank you for all you do.
Thank you for listening to this podcast on Inside Personal Growth. We appreciate your support. And for more information about new podcasts, please go to InsidePersonalGrowth.com or any of your favorite channels to listen to our podcast. Thanks again, and have a wonderful day.